This presentation was originally in front of a live audience and via WebEx. Due to technical recording difficulties, this is a re-recorded version. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this presentation for our high school coaches here in Richmond, Virginia. My name is Abby Foreman and I am a registered dietitian here at Secours Sports Performance. This presentation was a collaborative effort with our Secours athletic trainers, and thank you to all who helped put this together. Today we will be covering a number of topics relevant to helping our high school age athletes reach their full potential. Thank you to those who submitted questions ahead of time. Please feel free to submit questions further on our Secours Sports Performance website through the Contact Us form. Our outline today includes foundational nutrition, sport-specific nutrition, healthy weight changes, supplement safety, how to get the message across, and a variety of resources for coaches, athletes, and parents. Making the most of fueling opportunities can lead to improved performance, assist in building and repairing muscle, help store energy for exercise, reduce and delay fatigue, improve immune function and keep us from getting sick, help support proper growth and development, reduce the injury risk and even speed up healing, and also help with academic and overall focus and concentration on and off the field. Each athlete's diet will be specific to their needs, their sport, their body composition, intensity level, and their own nutritional goals. Being an athlete is more than what happens on the field. We want to teach our athletes to fuel with a purpose, to use every time they eat as an opportunity to fuel for success. Our goal is to help the athlete be the healthiest they can and grow to reach their full potential. Proper nutrition cannot make a bad athlete an All-American, but it can make a good athlete great, and poor nutrition habits can make a great athlete just good. As coaches, you are some of the most influential sources of information for these athletes. High school straddles a line between active puberty and post-puberty. When we talk about fueling these athletes, it's important to understand the spectrum across which we are fueling. Just because two athletes are the same age does not mean that they are at the same level of physical maturity. Their needs will change as they grow and mature. Each will grow at a slightly different rate, and our goal is to help them reach physical, mental, emotional, and cognitive maturity in the healthiest way possible. All athletes are humans first, and thus proper growth and health must be tackled first. Measuring growth is no easy task. There are various scales we can use to track progress and growth. Health professionals may look at labs and plot growth charts. For those of you who are parents, you may be familiar with a chart like this one. And I think it provides a good visual to show that growth is not linear as far as height or weight. Your young athletes are not simply small adults. They actually have different sweat rates, sweat sodium content. They don't handle heat as well. Their calorie needs are different. Their micronutrient needs are different. And their ability to build muscle will change as they grow. One way of tracking these changes in development is with the Tanner stages. Here is an estimated age, physical change, and sports-related effect of the 5 stages for females. In the first few years of high school, there are a lot of variation between where females may be and their changing needs. Don't forget about the emotional changes that are coming with all of these. We see changes in energy needs, fluid needs, iron, calcium, and a risk for disordered eating. It may be uncomfortable for coaches to discuss these changes with their athletes, but keeping the lines of communication open and honest can greatly benefit the athlete and help them understand the changing needs. Females tend to hit their peak height velocity sooner than males, and with this increased height comes increased energy and protein needs. Calcium also increases to strengthen these bones, and when menstruation starts, we get a greater risk for iron deficiency. Those with delayed menarche or those who lose their period due to low energy intake are at greater risk for bone issues since they don't have the protective effects of estrogen. This can happen with or without an eating disorder, but the risk of eating disorders and disordered eating patterns is greater at the stage of change. As coaches, we need to be aware of the risks and understand that athletes may hear things we say differently than we intended. The same pattern of changing needs that we see in the females, we see in the male development Tanner stages as well. So males tend to reach peak height velocity later in high school, which means for all of high school, there's a wide range of stages that the same age group might be at. You may see this manifest in a group of males trying to gain weight in the weight room. Some may have an easy time of adding muscle, while others do the same workout, eat well, and just aren't at the right stage of maturation yet for their hormones to support the goal of building muscle. This situation may be one which sparks the use of supplements in trying to solve the problem of not being able to gain muscle like their teammates. A coach who can identify when an athlete is not yet at the right stage to support the athlete's goal can help them to refocus on a goal more achievable at the time, such as increasing speed, agility, or endurance. As you are aware, high school athletes have a lot going on, not only with their growth and development, but also their busy lives, trying to balance education, sports, social lives, and home. Specific challenges that some of our athletes face is that 30% or more don't eat breakfast. They also might rely on school breakfast and school lunch, which can provide 450 to 600 calories on average for a breakfast and 750 to 850 on average for a lunch. But that's assuming that the athlete's taking everything that's offered to them and then that they're eating everything as well. They may also have rules against eating or drinking in the classrooms and hallways. Those who don't eat enough during the day may be trying to intake most of their calories and play catch-up in the evening time. They may play on multiple sports. They may have extra coaching things. They may play around with friends. All of this is going to require extra calories. And then 35% report taking some sort of supplement to try and fix these performance problems. Freshmen you may see with braces, taste preferences, lack of exposure to certain foods. And athletes might compare themselves to their teammates, siblings, or even the media. Here in Richmond, we have specific food access and financial issues. So 1 in 8 people here in Richmond struggle with hunger, and 1 in 7 children struggle with hunger. This map just helps to depict that low income and low access issue. So we're seeing that the orange and the green areas are those where you have low income and low access at a half-mile and 10-mile radius. So if you live in an urban area, it would take you longer than a half-mile or even a mile to get to some sort of grocery store. And if you live in a rural area, it takes you 10 miles or more. That means that simply telling an athlete what to eat does not mean that they can make it happen. We have to be mindful of the barriers that they're facing and do what we can to meet their needs wherever they are. So how many calories does a young athlete really need? Well, it could be anywhere from 2,000 to almost 4,000, maybe even more depending on how much they're doing throughout the day. We already said that school lunch may optimally provide about 850 calories, but that's assuming, again, that they're eating everything that's provided. Where are the rest of those calories coming from? And what happens if they don't get all that they need? Well, relative energy deficiency syndrome is an expansion on the female athlete triad. The triad is a combination of menstrual dysfunction, compromised bone health, and disordered eating, all stemming from low energy availability. REDS expands this to include a variety of physiological dysfunctions and also to include males. As coaches and athletic trainers, you're on the front lines and may be the first to notice the signs of an athlete struggling with low energy availability. Low energy availability is at the center and is defined as the amount of energy available for normal body function after the cost of sports. Compromised bone health can be seen at less than 30 calories per kilogram body weight, and optimal energy availability is defined as 45 calories per kilogram body weight and above. Any athlete can struggle with low energy availability. This statistically is higher risk for those in weight class, aesthetic, endurance, and judgment sports. And while disordered eating may play a role in the syndrome, it's not required. It could be that an athlete simply increased their training load and didn't increase their food intake to match the new demands. However, it is estimated that about 20 to 45% of females and up to 19% of males ages high school to college do have disordered eating patterns. This could include restrictive intake, this could be skipping meals, binging, purging, or even exercising beyond training needs just to account for excess calorie intake. Every sport follows a cycle: preseason, in-season, postseason. Sports nutrition periodization follows the same pattern, and our training goals for that season are supported by our nutrition focuses. We always start with preseason because we need to build that base. Nutrition has to start the same way. We have to have the daily needs down and then build on that. The perfect pregame meal won't make up for a poor daily diet. Just like we practice for the game, we have to practice what we're going to eat and make it a consistent habit. Healthy eating, especially for an athlete, means eating a variety of foods that give you the nutrients you need to maintain your health, feel good, and have energy for your day and your sport. The My Plate is a great place to start showing our different food groups and how they might fit in a balanced way on the plate. We can break these down further from their food groups into their main macronutrients or athlete fuels: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. All three are absolutely important and play different roles in the body. And we can't forget about hydration, as water may not be a macronutrient, but it is just as important. Carbohydrates are the primary fuel source for high-intensity athletics. We store it in our muscle and in our liver in the form of glycogen, and the body can hold about 90 minutes of this fuel, glycogen, in our muscle and liver. When we run out, we can see the signs of fatigue, and marathon runners tend to call this hitting the wall. Inadequate carbohydrate intake can impact our muscles and our brain function. Low blood sugar is called hypoglycemia. And when we run out of carbohydrates as that primary fuel source, we have to use something else. And sometimes it means breaking down protein from our muscles. Carbohydrates come in a variety of sources. We have complex carbohydrates, which tend to have higher fiber. They take longer to digest, and they are wonderful for replenishing these glycogen stores. They should be focused at meal times because they are going to keep you fuller longer. We want to think about whole grains, whole high fiber fruits, vegetables, beans, those types of things. High glycemic carbohydrates are simple. They have lower amounts of fiber, they take a shorter amount of time to digest, so they work great for right before or even during athletic endeavors, when you don't want something heavy sitting on your stomach. Think white bread, juice without pulp, or even a sports drink. Diving a little further into the complex carbohydrates, we want to remember it's whole fruits, whole grains, whole vegetables, whole beans, and that the colors actually do matter. When we're talking to young athletes, we can put a sports spin on the fact that they need all these different colors, in that orange and yellow ones are great for vision, but that's going to help them see at night, so especially a night game. And that the white ones are full of potassium, which is an electrolyte, which is going to help with hydration and replenishing those fluids. Even some of those items that kids go looking for in the form of supplements, like nitric oxide to help blood flow, well, we can get that from whole foods. We can get that from beets and our green leafy vegetables. So these really are superfoods. And the more we can push 5 servings, fruits and vegetables per day minimum, the better. So we're getting carbohydrates to replenish that muscle glycogen. We're getting fiber to help our gut function and boost immune function. We're getting antioxidants. We're getting electrolytes. We're also getting vitamins and minerals. And the body works so much better when we have it from whole food sources. So just to show how easy it can be, here's 9 different ways to get 5 fruits and vegetables total per day. And again, that's a minimum, not a maximum. It really does depend on your body size and your calorie needs as to how many servings you'll need. So complex carbohydrates also include whole grains, and whole grains include all 3 parts. So the bran, which is the outside fiber, the endosperm, which is the fluffy part that makes bread taste so good, and the germ, which is the B vitamins, the healthy fats, and the protein. This is why the refined grain of the white bread might work out well right before some sort of athletic endeavor, because it pulls out the fiber and it pulls out the fat, making it much easier to digest. And again, whole grains are what's recommended at mealtime. We want the higher fiber, we want to keep you fuller longer, we want to make sure that we're getting that level of the USDA guidelines of about 50% of our grains being whole grains. So protein is the second main macronutrient, and most athletes can pick out that protein is important for muscle building, but it's also important for immune function and hormone production, and helps us to maximize that recovery afterwards with both carbohydrates and protein. When we get enough protein, it also can help spare muscle breakdown when we're doing those longer endurance events, or if we don't have enough calories. It's better to spread out your protein intake over the whole day, not to just eat one giant porterhouse steak at the end. So, as you can see, protein can come from a number of different foods, whether it be animal or plant-based. Fat is the third main macronutrient, and fat gets kind of a bad rap sometimes, but it's absolutely necessary, especially for absorbing vitamin A, D, E, and K. So fat can be separated into three main types: saturated, which is the white fat you see in bacon or on a steak; trans fats, which are man-made and processed, and so they really do harm to our body. We want to minimize those as much as possible. And then unsaturated fats, which are the plant-based, so liquid at room temperature, thinking avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and such. Fats take longer to digest, so we want to minimize these before training. And they can be used as an energy source, especially at lower intensities. When trying to describe why fats are necessary, I sometimes tell my athletes that if they had no fat in their diet at all, they would bleed out, their wounds would never heal, they'd have low energy, and they'd have cracking skin everywhere and wouldn't be able to see at night. It's a little extreme, but it kind of gets the message across that fat is absolutely necessary. And like I said, we want to focus on the best sources first, the unsaturated. So we don't say that there are foods that we can't have at all. Like, we're not going to say no to fried foods, but we want to minimize these in the diet and guide our young athletes towards choosing the best choices whenever possible. When we talk about growth and development, we need to understand the micronutrients that are of great importance at this time as well. Calcium and vitamin D play an intricate role in building stronger bones. Full peak bone density, basically the strongest bones will ever be, is not reached until ages 18 to 20. Calcium is also important for muscle contraction and clearly plays an important role in sports. While vitamin D can be synthesized by our skin from the sun, most athletes spend the day inside classrooms, and they're not outside in direct UV rays. Additionally, they're wearing protective clothing or equipment, and they may be wearing sunscreen to block these rays. Now, it is important for these athletes to protect their skin and reduce the risk of skin cancer, but it does mean that they're less likely to get adequate vitamin D from sunlight. Low vitamin D can lead to fatigue, bone, and muscle pain. Iron is essential for carrying oxygen in the blood to all parts of the body. Besides obviously blood loss, the foot strike action of sport can actually rupture blood cells, leading to lower iron levels. Females, especially during teen years, tend to consume less dairy and red meat, putting them at risk for under-consuming these important nutrients. Vegetarian and vegan athletes may also be at higher risk for deficiencies if they don't follow a well-planned plant-based diet with adequate sources of these micronutrients. Here we're seeing different sources of vitamin D and calcium. There are not a lot of vitamin D sources in food. That's why sunlight is important, but there are fortified sources. And we see that females' needs are actually higher than males, but 3 to 4 servings of dairy per day would meet this goal. And here we're seeing the sources of iron. So heme iron, those from meats, are absorbed better than those from plants or non-heme, but we can increase the bioavailability by adding vitamin C whenever we're having the non-heme sources. And again, we see that females need more than males. So we need to encourage athletes to choose good sources of calcium, vitamin D, and iron daily. Luckily, it comes from all of the different food groups that we've already talked about. We see the protein food group there. We see the grains, the fruits, the vegetables, and the dairy to make up the calcium and vitamin D. Really coming back to that whole plate once again. And so this is actually the USOC's version of the athlete's plate. So take a look at how similar the My Plate looks to the Easy Training Weight Management plate. We have a quarter of the plate being the lean protein. We have half of the plate being made up of both fruits and vegetables. Another quarter of the plate being our good carbohydrate sources in those grains. And we have dairy on the side as well as a wonderful hydrator. So we encourage our young athletes to think about a plate type focus. They need to have 3 meals a day, and each of their plates needs to have the balance of all of the different food groups, macronutrients, and including those micronutrients. When we do so, we have that foundational nutrition, that base plate to start from. As our training load changes, our plate does too. When we need more energy, when we're having 2-a-day practices or we're having a game day, we need more carbohydrates as our primary fuel source. So the plate shifts to be about half of the plate being whole grains and starchy vegetables, and those fruits are playing into that carbohydrate as well. We don't get rid of the vegetables, we just shrink them down a little bit. They might get cooked to take down some of the bulk. And we don't make a giant plate of pasta. We still keep all of the other food groups. There really is just a shift from a quarter of the plate to a half of the plate as far as the starchy vegetables and the whole grains. So this is just an example menu of what that athlete's day might look like. We've got a breakfast, a snack, especially if lunch is going to be a little later, a pre-workout snack. During practice, there may be something needed if going longer than 90 minutes. And afterwards, we're having dinner right after for that recovery. Bedtime snacks might be necessary, especially if the athlete's trying to gain weight or if they have an early morning workout. If there's not going to be enough time in the morning to really be able to fuel, like wake up and have those 3 to 4 hours beforehand, then the bedtime snack and the dinner before become even more important. Now, water may not be a macronutrient, but like we said, it's just as important. Young athletes are at higher risk for heat illness due to their poor heat acclimation. Especially here in Richmond, we have hot and humid weather. The kids are going to be wearing a lot of equipment. They may be starting out the preseason not in the best of shape. All of this can contribute to how they might be affected. So hydration really needs to be a cycle. We need pre, during, and post, just like that graph up top shows. We need to remember that sweat is not just water. We're actually losing electrolytes, the primary electrolytes being sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. So when we're losing sweat, we need to put these things back as well as the water. Now the question always comes up, well, isn't thirst enough? Doesn't the thirst tell us that we need to have water, and if we're not thirsty, aren't we hydrated enough? The answer is maybe. Yes, thirst is our body's natural way of telling us when we need fluids. However, especially youth athletes and aging athletes, that sense of thirst can really be tampered down, or there might not be adequate opportunities for them to drink. So we might need to actually retrain. If they've been ignoring thirst for a while, or maybe they've even been confusing thirst with hunger, we might not be as tuned in as we would normally be. So it may be enough, but we need to put in the opportunities for them to be able to drink and not rely on the athlete to tell us when they're thirsty. We're all familiar with the signs of dehydration: thirst, weakness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, lack of coordination and judgment. But the goal of hydration when we're playing a sport is really to keep the body within 1 to 2% of that dehydration. So not going more than 1 to 2% of body weight loss from sweat. So the goal is actually not to drink back everything that you're losing from sweat, because otherwise we're going to end up waterlogged. Hyponatremia, while rare, is a serious condition, and it can be potentially deadly. It happens when we lose sweat, but we're actually only putting back water, so we end up diluting the electrolytes in our system. Your athletic trainers are trained to see this and treat this. So if you do suspect that you've seen a kid drinking copious amounts of water and only water, then hey, we need to say slow down, and we maybe need to get them checked out by an athletic trainer. The signs of hyponatremia are very similar to dehydration, so it can be a little hard to catch. So how do we prevent dehydration? Well, we start with drinking water daily. And we start with about half of the body weight in ounces. That's an easy place to provide a recommendation from. We need to remember that fluids are actually coming from our fruits and vegetables too. They're not only a good source of carbohydrates, but they're also mostly water. So we can get actual fluids from them, and it's a little hard to quantify that. When we come closer to practice, we want to be drinking about 2 cups of water a couple hours beforehand, and as it gets closer, a little less, about a cup. remember, we don't want to start a game with a full stomach or a full bladder. During, we want to be able to sip whenever possible. So it should come out to about every 20 minutes. You can have about 4 to 8 ounces of water. And one sip is about 1 ounce. So if you're having to drink from a water fountain because you didn't bring a bottle, then we can remind the kids to, okay, count to at least 4 to 8 before you say that you're done. Afterwards, we're replacing those fluids. So we don't want to drink everything back during the game, but afterwards we want to put it all back, about 16 to 20 ounces per pound loss of fluid. So 16 ounces of water equals 16 ounces on a scale, and we're making up for the fact that some of it we're going to pee out. I like to tell my athletes to focus on looking in the toilet, because if you chug down water really quickly, you're just going to see clear, whereas I want to see pale to light yellow every single time. We want to be pacing it. We don't want to push athletes towards having clear pee, because it can lead to that waterlog. It can lead to that potential risk for hyponatremia, undercutting those electrolytes. I like to give my athletes an old-fashioned yellow sticky note. It's actually the perfect color of half lemonade, half water. And so when they stick a sticky note up behind the toilet, every time that they pee, they can actually take a look and say, hey, am I close? If their pee is darker than that sticky note, I want them to have about 8 ounces right then and there, and then continue to drink as they normally would. Don't want them chugging down much more. And then again, the next time they go to the bathroom, do the same thing. If it's still not the right color, drink a little bit more and pace it. And for those who aren't allowed to bring a water bottle to class, maybe asking their doctor to write some sort of medical note stating that it is important for them. I've done this for some of my athletes before, and it works out very well. So what are the best hydrators? Well, water is always going to be first. Energy drinks are not appropriate and contain high amounts of caffeine and sugar. They're actually going to hinder an athlete's performance, especially if they're drinking multiples. Sports drinks, on the other hand, are specifically formulated to provide refuel of energy and electrolytes. They're not necessary, but they may be a better or more convenient choice if real food cannot be consumed to get the carbohydrate and electrolyte like salt. Or they may be a better choice if we're worried about an upset stomach from real food. They're for events lasting longer than 60 to 90 minutes of intense activity, or when we have multiple events back to back without time to eat. There are no specific recommendations for youth athletes, but instead we're going to use the adult athlete recommendations of 3 to 8% carbohydrate, which comes out to 7 to 19 grams of carbohydrate per 8 ounces. And it needs to also include 110 to 220 milligrams of sodium per 8 ounces and 30 milligrams of potassium per 8 ounce. Examples of these currently on the market include Gatorade, Powerade, and Pedialyte. For a minute, let's talk about muscle cramps. There is a difference between a muscle cramp and a side stitch. Stitches can be due to improper breathing, where muscle cramps are sudden and involuntary contractions of one or more muscle. Why do these happen? Well, we aren't entirely sure. There are actually 3 theories on muscle cramps. The first is dehydration, and that's the lack of water. And oftentimes, muscle cramps happen when it's hot and humid outside. And athletes who have muscle cramps tend to also be dehydrated. So we need to start with making sure that our athlete is hydrating through that cycle, before, during, and after, and not trying to play catch up. Electrolytes are the second theory, especially the top 5 components of sweat: sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Lower levels of these electrolytes, especially sodium, can get in the way of nerves firing correctly. So if an athlete is having a muscle cramp and drinking a sports drink makes them feel better, it may be that the electrolyte balance was off. Muscle fatigue is the third theory, and we know that this plays a role because when you have a muscle cramp and you stretch out the muscle, it tends to relieve the pain. Some of the ways of preventing muscle cramps: we want to start out by hydrating. We want to make sure that we have adequate sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and magnesium in our diet. And remember that those things come from foods, and including salt in the foods that we're making. And then we want to make sure that we're warming up properly before our game, and that we are stretching out, and that we had a proper preseason to really be in the best shape. When we put all of it together for the fueling timeline, we want to first and foremost think about when is the event that we're even trying to fuel for. Once we have an idea of when that is, we work backwards to figure out how much time we have and what we can consume. First, we want to make sure that we're consuming water throughout the day. If we have 3 to 4 hours before a game or before a practice or match, we want to gas up the tank, put in all of those carbohydrates, refuel those glycogen stores. We can afford to have some moderate amounts of fiber, some protein, and some fat because we have the time to digest it. It's going to look similar to that high-intensity athlete's plate. We're still hydrating with water in between. And then if we have about 1 to 2 hours before, we're going to top off the tank, focusing on simpler carbohydrates, less fiber, less protein, and less fat, as these 3 things slow down digestion. During the game, we're hydrating with water. If we're going to be going longer than 90 minutes of intense activity, we may put something in there like food or like a sports drink of some kind. We don't want much fiber here. Again, fiber is going to take time to digest. We're hydrating, and then afterwards, we're putting back everything that we lost. So we're replenishing those glycogen stores for the next event. We're repairing the muscle that we broke down with it having protein, and we're reinforcing with antioxidants to reduce that inflammatory response. So these are coming from our whole grains, our fruits, our vegetables, and then we're putting back all the fluids we lost. Post-fuel recovery is not just a one and done. It needs to be continued and repeated every 2 to 4 hours until the next event. We can continue to use the timeline in thinking about when the next time we're going to have to perform is. So if it's 1 to 2 hours from when we ended, go back there and focus on those goals. Breaking down those fueling goals for before the game or practice, carbohydrates are our main focus. We want to make sure we are starting with a gas tank full enough to get us through the event. The amount of carbohydrate will be dependent on the athlete's body weight and the amount of time they have to digest. A larger athlete is going to need and be able to tolerate a larger amount. The amount of fiber we include will also be dependent on the amount of time and the athlete's normal diet. If they don't yet normally consume a high fiber diet, it will likely cause gastrointestinal issues, and adding it now is not a good idea. If we have 3 to 4 hours before we need to be competing, then we can have a moderate amount of protein and fat. Again, fat, fiber, and protein all slow down digestion. Liquids may be easier to consume, especially with an athlete who has a history of anxiety or gastrointestinal issues. Liquids actually take less time in the stomach. One very important point is that we don't want an athlete trying anything new on competition or game day. They need to be foods that they have tried in practice and are used to eating. So that example of what you might eat 3 to 4 hours before could be that turkey wrap, vegetables and hummus, baked chips, low-fat milk. And then 30 to 60 minutes before, we're going simpler. Fruit and granola bar, water, just topping off the tank before we get on the field. During the game, reloading is only necessary for athletes who are going longer than 60 to 90 minutes. If the game is more than 60 minutes, but the athlete has not been playing for much of it, it's likely unnecessary for them to eat anything during. We want to choose simple carbohydrates. It does not take much, 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and this could be a handful of salted pretzels. If an athlete tries to gobble down a large amount, they're likely going to have some stomach pain, or if chugging down water and Gatorade, they may get a sloshing stomach and feel sluggish on the field. Again, practicing these food choices needs to be done prior to the competition. In a tournament type situation, we want to be packing a number of different options so that when we get to the field, if an athlete isn't feeling like one thing, they have the choice of another. Again, things that they've tried before that they know that they're comfortable with. But packing a lot of things is going to be better than just packing one and hoping that the athlete wants to eat it. So post-game, we're refueling. We're putting back everything we just used. It's important to start as soon as possible because the muscle is primed to absorb those carbohydrates and protein to refuel for the next event. So replenishing those glycogen stores, that carbohydrate we use, we want to start with about 0.5 grams per pound body weight. So take your body weight, cut it in half, and then start there. We want to then add in protein for muscle building, 15 to 25 grams, depending on the size of the athlete. We want to put in those antioxidants. Those are going to help with decreasing the oxidative stress and get us a quicker recovery. Focusing on the food sources, so colorful fruits, vegetables, whole grains, etc. And we want to choose water to drink to get us back to pale yellow. So rehydrating, again, for every pound lost, we're putting back about 16 to 20 ounces. Now, recovery is not just a one and done. We want to refuel every 2 hours. So those example meals could be chocolate milk right after. Milk actually makes a great recovery beverage because it has electrolytes, it has protein, it also has carbohydrates. So it's kind of this nice packaged meal. Then we want 2 hours later to have, again, bagels, peanut butter, Greek yogurt, something with those carbohydrates and protein. And then we are making sure to have that beverage. And again, 2 to 4 hours later, we're having, another meal. Leucine is one of the essential amino acids that is getting a lot of press right now. Sports research has found that there is a leucine threshold, where once you take in about 2 grams or more of leucine, it maximally stimulates that muscle protein synthesis. Many protein supplements will tout their leucine content, but in reality, we can get leucine easily through food. And again, we want to promote a food-first focused approach with our high school athletes, and really at every age. This chart shows a variety of high-quality protein sources that in the amount shown provide 2 grams of leucine. It doesn't have to come from protein shakes. It doesn't have to come from supplements. Any of these, or even in combination, would make great protein sources in that recovery meal for our young athletes. Coaches and athletic trainers are the eyes and the ears on the field. You know your athletes. We want to be mindful of healthy weight loss and gain practices and guide them towards better performance, not a number on the scale. We're better off having the athlete focus on getting faster, stronger, increasing agility and endurance, things that they can measure on the field, and not a number. We have to remember that they are growing and understand when making weight change is appropriate and when it is not. During puberty, it is only appropriate with a medical professional's advice to make sure they're still tracking on that growth curve. Post-puberty, we want to limit it to off-season and pre-season, because otherwise if we are doing it in season, we're going to be impacting their performance. Why? Because we want to remember that growth and development rates are different, and we want to make sure that they are staying on that proper growth trajectory for them and avoid any triggers of eating disorders. So the coach's role is to guide the athlete towards healthy goals focused on performance and helping them to play their best game, supporting the athlete's growth and development needs, reminding them of the My Plate, and be on the lookout for disordered eating behaviors. It might not be an eating disorder, but if an athlete's skipping meals, avoiding team dinners, working out beyond the requirements of your practice, and especially in excess, picking apart their food, or avoiding pre-game and post-game snacks to make up for something that they ate that they're thinking is bad, these things may not be an eating disorder, but they are disordered eating, and they're not normal eating patterns for young athletes. You may be the first one to see them, and you can refer to a healthcare professional as appropriate. So for healthy gains, if an athlete is less than 18 years old, we should still be speaking to the parent about it first. We want to be mindful of where they are on that growth curve and any other health conditions that may be present. One example I had was a young athlete who was sent to me by his doctor. He had acanthosis nigricans, which is the brown, patchy-looking, scaly thing on the back of the neck, and this condition is a sign of insulin resistance and increased risk of diabetes. He was overweight on the growth curve, and we needed to be working towards some healthy food changes. But his football coach wanted him to gain weight to better support his position on the field. Because of his health conditions, gaining that weight was not a good idea. So again, we need to make sure that the goal is appropriate first. Then, we need to take into account how much the athlete is already doing. If they're playing on multiple teams, separate speed and agility work, playing with friends, and regular yard work, it's going to be very difficult for them to eat enough to sustain that activity, let alone gain weight. When we expand the plate, we want to do it in every direction with all of the food groups. We want to increase meal frequency and size. We can add liquids as they're easier to digest and maybe an easier way of increasing calories if the athlete can't eat enough in solid food sources. We want to focus on adding quality of quantity, not junk. This is a list of some ideas of healthy snack foods that can add that quality and high calorie choices. These are not all of the choices by any means, but some easy ones to throw in a backpack for in between class or in a locker. Athletes, coaches, and parents do need to be mindful of what they're allowed to bring to school. It could be as simple as whole grain bread and peanut butter to make a great packable snack between class, but many schools don't allow peanut products or any nut products. The athlete may need to ask a coach or health professional to write them a note for their teacher to allow them to even eat in class or in a hallway. We just need to meet that athlete wherever they are. Healthy weight management, again, physician and parent need to be on board first. We want to be talking positively. We don't ever want to be talking about weight negatively. Even if we don't mean to say it in a certain way, the teenage ear is going to hear it differently. And we can't guarantee that they are going to hear it the way we intended. So if we aren't talking about weight and we're talking about improving performance and speed and skills and all those other things that they can relate to, it makes it much more likely that they're going to receive the message in the way we intended, that we care about them as an athlete and that we want to help them be the best that they could be. So then we want to work towards improving the nutritional quality, not restricting. Maybe it is less sodas and less candy and less sweet tea, but it's replacing it with higher quality choices. But we never want to see an athlete cutting out food groups. Each of our food groups are there for a different reason. They each have their own unique benefits. Skipping meals is also not okay for athletes. It's going to make them hungrier later, and who of us makes a better choice when we're hungry? We never want to see an athlete lose weight faster than 1.5% body weight per week. And we can use that athlete's plate to be our guide. We want to reduce the amount in all directions, still including all of those nutrient-dense choices. So supplements. Like I said, there's a large amount of youth athletes out there who are experimenting with supplements. There are 3 main different classes of supplements. Sports foods are specialized products used to provide practical sources of nutrients when it's impractical to consume everyday foods. They're for convenience. They don't have anything more than normal food would be able to provide. They just might be more advantageous in certain situations. These might be sports drinks, gels, liquids, whey protein powder, sports bars, those types of things. And they come with a nutrition facts label. Medical supplements are the second class, and these are used to treat a clinical issue, including a diagnosed nutritional deficiency. They do require individual dispensing and supervised by an appropriate medical professional. They may be iron, calcium, multivitamin, vitamin D, etc. The third group is the performance supplements, and these are used to directly improve performance. These again need to be individualized and supervised by a medical professional, and there is not currently enough evidence on their safety in youth athletes to be able to recommend their use. For those athletes who are using a medical supplement to treat a known deficiency, it is important to understand that there are potential adverse effects with athletes who consume high intakes of vitamin A, niacin, B6, vitamin C, D, and E above tolerable limits. This is not a more is better situation. In fact, vitamin C that is touted as an antioxidant in high levels actually becomes pro-oxidant and creates damage on the cells. Female athletes, especially distance runners, may be at higher risk for certain nutritional deficiencies like protein, zinc, and iron. But again, we need to be testing before we treat. And these deficiencies can be supported with daily nutrition and whole foods before we turn to a supplement. The FDA is the government agency that regulates prescription drugs and over-the-counter medications. Since the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, the supplement industry has not been regulated by the FDA. Because of this, it's basically legal for someone to scoop up dirt into a pill and sell it. Only if someone complains and can show that it was unsafe is it even removed from the market. Thus, when our athletes start looking at supplements, we need to help educate them about how to be a conscious consumer. There are no guarantees that the amount, concentration, or even specific ingredients listed on the bottle are actually what's in there. And many supplements have been shown to be contaminated with banned substances, whether purposefully or accidentally. So when an athlete asks you about a supplement, the first thing we want to do is get to the bottom of the why. Why are they looking to start using a supplement? Maybe it's for performance gains, maybe it's peer pressure or the pressure to win or insecure body issues. If we can get to their background reason, we might be able to actually solve their true issue. So maybe it's an athlete is trying to gain muscle, and so they want to use some sort of enhancer, but they are not at the correct stage of development to be able to support that muscle mass like we talked about before. Well, we can have them focus on other goals instead and make sure that they're meeting their food needs first. Second, we want to help them to check for third-party testing. These are outside organizations that check for banned substances and contamination and purity standards. They cannot tell you whether or not a supplement actually works. Some of the most popular ones are NSF, which actually has an app to be able to download and scan a supplement to see if it's been tested by them, Informed Choice, and USP. The third thing we want them to do is avoid proprietary blends. Typically, this is a fancy way of saying that the company was too cheap to put in good quality ingredients that they want you to know the brand names of, or they didn't put in enough of any one substance to be able to be an effective dose. The fourth thing is the dose based on scientific research? Remember that there is very little research on youth athletes and supplement use at all, so that's a hard one to prove. Number 5 is if the claim sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Remember that a supplement company's goal is to make you think you need something. They have to create a problem in order to sell you a solution. Number 6 is if you make it through all the others, never try anything right before competition. We always want to practice before. We practice for the game, we practice our food beforehand. Same thing goes with any supplement that we might want to take. And you can always ask your dietitian for help evaluating a supplement. When we start pulling it all together for what are the takeaways and things that we are going to pass on to athletes, athletes need to eat at regular intervals throughout the day. Low energy intake can result in poor performance, growth delays, and lifelong consequences. That's those red S and female athlete triad issues that we talked about before. We want to promote nutrient-dense choices first, making sure that daily nutrition comes from whole grains, fruits, vegetables, dairy, protein, and healthy fats. Suggesting high-fat and high-sugar foods shouldn't be included is overly restrictive and is only going to lead to cravings. So we want an inclusive plan where we focus on the nutrient-dense choices first, but don't say that an athlete can't have a certain food. We want to start hydration over the whole day and not encourage playing catch-up. So drinking consistently before, during, and after, so there never is a moment where the athlete is behind. Again, that pale yellow sticky note is a great way for the athlete to be able to check daily at home and at school whether or not they're in a hydrated state. We want to promote improving performance instead of any focus on weight, giving them a concrete goal to strive for, like speed, agility, skill development. These are the ways to go, and make sure that we're talking about things positively. We want to be on the lookout for disordered eating patterns. Remember, it doesn't have to be an eating disorder to be an unhealthy food relationship. And we want to let them know that supplements can't fix a poor daily nutrition problem. We have to support daily all of our needs for growth and development and normal body function, as well as athletic performance, in order to support the athlete in becoming the best that they can be. So how do we get that message across? Well, first and foremost, we have to role model the behaviors that we're trying to instill in these kids. We have to be eating whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, and showing them how wonderful keeping a balanced diet is. If we expect them to do the same, they are actually watching what you're doing. They will take it seriously if you take it seriously. We want to talk positively and keep talking. It's not a one and done. It's a conversation that keeps on going. We want to be encouraging the athlete to work hard, be faster, and achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And we don't want to do this by scolding them. It has to be a team effort. We have to have everyone who's giving these messages be on the same page. So whether it's every person on the sideline, whether it's the parents, whether it's the teammates, everybody who is passing along these messages has to be saying the same thing. We want to involve the kids in the actual food decisions whenever possible. So if there's a team dinner, maybe give them the athlete's plate so that they can have an opportunity to build that plate in accordance to what we said that they need. Maybe it's just giving the opportunity to drink throughout practice if that's not something that's already being done. Or if they have an opportunity to choose a pregame meal or a pregame snack or a postgame snack, we want to be showing those same good choices and giving them the opportunity to make the better choice. What we don't want to do is we don't want to make it about weight. Again, they are not going to hear what you say exactly as you intend it. We don't want to compare an athlete to their friends, siblings, or even their teammates. We also don't want to continue the clean plate club. So whether it's a team meal or maybe it's your athlete at home, we don't want to be encouraging the athlete to tune into their own body, to listen to those internal cues. We don't want to encourage restricting intake. And we can't expect that logic is going to be the game changer. Remember that with the growth and development of these young athletes, cognitive development is going on too, and mental maturity, and these things don't come to fruition until in the 20s. Here we have just some ideas of how to make that nutrition a part of actual practice. So maybe it's taking a water bottle and having the team mark lines on it for that 4 to 8 ounces amount that we're trying to get kids to drink every 20 minutes. And it's not that we're going to hold them to that they have to drink 4 to 8 ounces every 20 minutes. Maybe we just check in with them and see how quickly or slowly they're going compared to that line and to encourage them to get a little bit closer. If we see that they're chugging down multiple bottles, we say, hey, let's slow down. If we see that they haven't even come close to getting 4 ounces in an hour's practice, we need to say, hey, let's try and tune in a little bit more and try and drink a bit. If it's that team dinner, again, using the athlete's plate to compare and have them actually involved in building the meals. And one way to kind of get the conversation going is to start using some of those nutrition verbiages, using the 5 food groups and such in your conditioning drills or in your sports things you might normally number like 1, 2, and 3 or red, green, and yellow. Instead, we can name it fruit, vegetable, and grain and start incorporating some of that messaging a little bit more consistently. Like we said, one of the barriers here in Richmond is low income and low access. So this is kind of a teaser for some of those ideas for snacks for pregame as low as less than $2 per snack, which all incorporate complex, simple carbohydrates and some sort of protein, depending on, again, how much time there is before practice. There is a much longer and more in-depth chart and selection sheet included in the resources on the website. There's also a more detailed list of some of the assistance programs that may be available to your athletes and their families. This is a list of just some of the resources that are available for coaches, athletes, and parents. All of the governing body organizations are wonderful sources as well, and many of these include downloadable resources specific to your athlete population that you can print out and use. There are specific apps as well. NSF, as we mentioned, you can scan a supplement and see if it's been approved. And even more resources. This is just the list of included ones that you can download on our website. Again, that low-cost athlete fueling guide for those pre-workout snacks. And then more resources a little bit more specific to athletes, especially if they're getting some of their information from Pinterest or from YouTube. These are some sound sources, as there's many different sources out there that are touting poor information. We can help to direct them to some better resources. Currently, Secours Sports Performance is offering an ACL injury prevention and performance training camp. It's going to be available to any and all athletes, teams, or individuals. And for more information, please contact us through the website or the numbers listed. And to wrap it all up, here are the sports dietitian resources available from Secours Sports Performance to athletes here in the Richmond area. Individual sports sessions are available through retail or through insurance with a doctor's referral. Team presentations and sport-specific topics can be requested either through the website or through the clinic directly. Thank you all for joining us for this presentation today. Again, if you have questions, feel free to submit them through the Contact Us form on the website. And good luck in your upcoming season.